It's all about edge rushers on today's Peacock and Williamson. Should the Cincinnati Bengals trade Shemar Stewart? Talks with Trey Hendrickson back on. Who are the best pass rushers in the NFL by just about every metric? Coming up on today's. And who's next, by the way? Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look at the NFL on the field and in the front office with elite breakdowns to next-level analysis and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Get those mailbag questions in for this week's mailbag episode on Thursday at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Drop a question on YouTube. And, of course, subscribe while you're there. Tell a friend. And if you're already subbed up, hit the thumbs up. Let us know that you stopped by. Of course, you can subscribe to Peacock and Williamson on any of your audio podcast platforms as well. We are everywhere every day. It's what we do here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We are talking defensive ends, pass rushers on today's program, looking at all the data. Big thanks to Tyler Jaggy, who we found on Twitter, who kind of broke down all the information. We've got a graph we're going to put up on the screen for you if you're watching on YouTube. Every data point possible, courtesy of PFF, for the pass rushers and who's been the most disruptive pass rushers over the course of the last 3 years in the NFL, and maybe talk about some guys that could be next on this list who are not quite yet. One of the names on the list is Trey Hendrickson, Matt, and apparently talks are a little bit back on. Bengals are going to be a conversation we have a lot this offseason until they figure out both of their edge rushers in rookie Shemar Stewart, 17th overall pick, still unsigned. Could he be traded is the talk now. And then Trey Hendrickson. Both those guys dug in. Bengals seem to be dug in, but more talks is good, and there's still plenty of time. Like, people forget, a lot of first-round picks used to not be signed at this point in the offseason. So seeing fans kind of freak out about this might be a little bit on the younger side, not remembering how difficult it used to be to sign first-round.
Good old days, yeah.
Like, we go into training camp, and these guys wouldn't be done to have so few. The big difference with Shemar Stewart and the Bengals and what's going on right now is a lot of the undrafted, a lot of the other unsigned draft picks are still participating in everything, and Shemar Stewart is not. So it's definitely more contentious than others. So that fans aren't wrong for realizing that and wondering what the heck is going on. Let's focus on Trey Hendrickson first, Matt. And the Bengals at some point have to save face and get something done with somebody, and they owe it to Joe Burrow and their fans to have a defense and not do the dance that they did last year, even if it's still not going to be a great defense, even if they have Shemar Stewart and Trey Hendrickson on the football field.
Yeah, and I listened to a podcast about this over the weekend since we got together last, and I didn't even realize that recently, I guess the county Cincinnati's in, or the city or whatever, approved stadium stuff for them. Like, they're giving them a bunch of money, and I can't exactly confirm that. I don't know the ins and outs of that situation, and that the Brown family is like the wealthiest in the whole city of Cincinnati, give or take. You know, like, a lot of financial stuff about the organization and the family that owns them has come out. And it doesn't make them out to be as hard up as it looks. You know what I mean? Like, and my point is, it's just a bad look. You know, I mean, it's just, give it to your players. We know that your situation is super profitable. You're drafting these guys on defense. You got a home run in Hendrickson when you signed him in free agency. Make a run at this thing while you still have Burrow. And I'm sure the fans are starting to react in a negative manner. Now, that hasn't influenced the Bengals much in our lifetime, but it's simply, to me, just the right thing to do is to get both these guys under contract and try to win the whole damn thing. You know what I mean? Like, you got a pretty good football team here, and build the goodwill with your city as well.
And they've come really close. And what are we doing if that's not the goal? And I mean,
it's been like the same teams in the Super Bowl. It's the Niners, it's the Steelers, or the Chiefs, the Eagles. And then there's the Bengals. They went once too, you know, like they can do this, you know.
The
Bills haven't gone. The Ravens haven't gone.
It's going to be like a Dan Marino situation, right? Oh, he got close earlier in your career, one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and then You just kind of become a mediocre team for the next 15 years, right?
Yeah. It might be a real crossroads in that organization right now.
So important. Their first round pick, Shemar Stewart, still unsigned. He left minicamp was the story last week. And now I'm seeing a lot of talk that, could the Bengals trade Shemar Stewart? One of our listeners asked us, Matt, like, how come, like, is there a rule against it? How come you see it in every other sport? You see it in Major League Baseball after the draft. You see it in the NBA. There's all kinds of crazy trades before picks, after picks. NFL teams never trade a prospect after they're drafted, but before they're signed. It never happens. You would think at some point there would be maybe a team that wanted to trade up for a guy. They couldn't get it done. Maybe team X was on the clock and they're like, well, we don't need this player, but he's the best player on the board. We're going to draft him. And then a team would come up and call and be like, look, this doesn't fit. Let's make this work and make a trade after, the clock is done. And it just never happens. And I always wondered why that never happened. We had listeners like, is there a rule against it? Not to my knowledge. And
I don't think so.
Should the Bengals trade Shemar Stewart at this point if they think they're at an impasse?
Yeah, it's not like they even gave him a signing bonus that they wouldn't get back. I mean, it's basically
just rights.
Just rights, yeah. It's funny you brought that up because I've thought that often too. Like, okay, I'm sitting here at 10. I know this is the best player on the board, but I've got 3 edge rushers or 3 linebackers. I don't really need them. Bunch of people are calling. I can't quite get a deal done. The 15-minute clock is tick, 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 tick. So I'm just going to take the best player, and I'll talk to the Bears and the Lions later about it, and we'll get something done. I'll move them after the fact. And it never, ever, ever happens. It's just like once he's drafted from you, the fan base falls in love. The Goodell gives him a hug, and boom, before you know it, you can never move him again during his rookie contract. I don't understand it. Why not move him 15 minutes later? Continue your talks, Yeah,
and if I'm a team that really liked Shemar Stewart, put a call into the Bengals. See how they feel about things, because the Bengals are in a realistic spot here. If they think that Shemar Stewart might go back, that they would get nothing.
Right. They could be. Now there's this looming disaster of our first round pick gave us 0, and at least we can get something back on the investment. Maybe turn that into a veteran edge rusher at the trade deadline or whatever.
Right.
What do you think the compensation would be, though?
It wouldn't be 1 for 1. So I could see a team offering a first if they think they're going to be a playoff team. And
I say if you're the Lions,
exactly, a team that thinks they're going to be good, where that would be a piece that's helpful for them to remain good. Mm-hmm. And you had that value on Shemar Stewart, a late 1 I could see, but I think it would probably be like you would get a 2 realistically. And I think
a generic 2,
maybe even a 2027 5th, or maybe if he signs, first of all, and the stipulation is
plays X amount of snaps,
and if he plays this many snaps, if he has 10 sacks or
whatever,
now it's a 2nd and a 3rd or something.
If you're Green Bay, would you do it? Like, I think the Lions would, maybe just and maybe it's like, give me Stewart and a 4th and I'll give you my 1st, something like that.
I think almost every team would be like, okay, well, here, let's do a 2nd, right? And so it becomes like either everyone's interested or nobody's interested. And so you bring up a couple teams, maybe late, it would take a 1 right now. And if you're the Bengals, it would probably have to be closer to camp where you would start to cave and take less.
There's no reason to move them in the next couple weeks.
Unless they're
not doing football stuff anyways.
I would, if you're Bengals and you really think this is going, you don't like the way this is going, and you did get that 1, even if it's a late 1 from, say, the Detroit Lions, maybe you take that. Maybe there's a player. Maybe there's other. Maybe you can muddy the water enough with other stuff, like a player here and there. So it's not just this pick for this guy, because then it looks bad because now you got the 27th pick instead of the 17th pick that you spent on him the next year. But maybe if there's players involved or something to muddy the water a little bit to make it not look so 1 for 1, maybe that would be easier. But it would have to be a pretty good offer for the Bengals to do it now. But I could see if this gets closer, the Bengals would have to start looking at this, be like, it could be nothing. So a 3rd might be all we would get. And at that point, you would have to seriously start considering some things. And again, the Bengals aren't the type of team to swing a lot of trades either. So they might be the one team that can't get a deal done. They also might be the one team that would just eat it because they can't make moves for some reason.
Right.
Organizationally.
I mean, it definitely would look bad if you buy a $100,000 Cadillac and it sits in your driveway collecting dust. You don't even turn the thing on, and then you give it to the neighbor for $80,000. Like, that's not great,
Not good business. Worse business to not utilize a draft pick at all if he ends up going back to school.
Right. It'd be better than it blowing up in your driveway.
They've had the conversations, so they might have a little better feeling than others. And the fact that Shemar and his agent are dug in enough to where they're not practicing when every other unsigned pick is practicing, that there's a little extra. There's another layer of like, okay, this might be harder ball than we've seen in recent history. And so, yeah,
it's getting sticky. I mean, I don't think there's any way around it. Cincinnati has magnifying glasses on them right now.
Only three things can happen in this situation, and two of them we've never really seen. Either he's going to go back to school or get traded, or he's going to sign.
And as you mentioned last week, he can't play next year. He can go back to the draft. He can't go to a school. Yeah.
Thank you for fixing
which would be crazy.
Back into the draft next year, not back to school.
Yeah. Which I would think his stock would drop a little, 10%, just because you haven't watched the recent film.
Mm-hmm. We actually have a question about this concerning quarterbacks in the next year's draft. And we start seeing how the landscape of the NFL is changing. So we'll talk about this on Thursday, Matt.
Okay.
Arch Manning is the big name right now in college football, and him controlling his own destiny if he doesn't like the team at the top, and how NIL makes a big difference in all of this for players. Would you rather go into the draft or take an extra bit of dollars and make sure that you end up in the right situation in the right year rather than leaving college after a 1.5 sack season for these other prospects?
Let's definitely dig into that, because like Quinn Ewers should have went back to school.
Right. Or or come out like when his stock was the highest 2 years ago or something.
Right. This was not the time to come out.
Yeah, it was just like he's been bad and continues to be bad. And so, and
drafted late. Now he
hurt himself. No doubt. All right, let's talk about the best pass rushers. We got all kinds of data courtesy of PFF here. Who are the best pass rushers in the NFL? And maybe some guys that will be on the list sometime soon. Next. This episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by Gametime and the Gametime app. And if you've not used Gametime, it is a phenomenal resource to get tickets for concerts, comedy shows, theater events, and of course, any kind of sporting event you want, including playoff games, NBA playoffs, NBA finals, right? NHL playoffs. The intensity, the buzzer beaters, fans losing their minds. It's the kind of atmosphere you must experience live, and this year's matchups delivering. If you want in, Gametime makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest playoff games. Prices on the app actually drop closer to tip-off. And with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, no surprise fees, Gametime is a total game changer. I've said it before. If you are a sports fan, and I know you are because you're listening to this podcast, you ever want to go to a concert or comedy show, you got to have Gametime in your pocket ready to go. You should always check Gametime for seats because you can get awesome deals. And I've used it numerous times to go catch the San Francisco Giants on a whim, Friday night off. Let's go catch a ball game. Going to concerts, went to a concert, said that was so awesome out there. They added a night. I'm going to go the next night. I'm going to check Gametime. Got half off ticket price with the Gametime app, and you can too. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. I'm going to bring up a visual accompaniment to this segment, Matt.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
The best pass rushers in the NFL. And shout out again to Tyler Jaggi, who put all this information together in a beautiful graph. We'll explain the graph if you're not watching on YouTube. It's impact score, disruption rate, pass rushers, edge rushers specifically over the course of the last 3 seasons with all the data coming from PFF. And so on this graph, you're going to find a ton of stuff, including pass rush.
And it's not just pass rush too, because it is like there's run defense grades and like forced fumbles and things like that too.
It's edge rushers are the players, but run defense matters too. You got to get the third down, right, Matt? So it's all important. And sometimes disruption equals production. Maybe you don't get the sacks, so instead of just shorthand looking at sacks, their sack rate is on here, and sack totals are on here, and total hits and all of those things. But there's forced fumbles, there's run stops, there is tackles for loss. There's so many ways to impact a game for a defensive lineman, and not all of them show up in your everyday stat book, but they all are here in the PFF data. And it probably shocked no one to realize, and the graph as it's displayed here is filtered by disruption rate, just total disruption rate. Number one is Myles Garrett in that regard in the NFL. Number 2, Micah Parsons. Number 3, Nick Bosa. Number 4, guy we already talked about, Trey Hendrickson.
Sure.
And, I think it's probably not a shock that some of those names are on the list.
No, and I think you said this, and if it might have went over my head. I just want to let everyone know it's a 3-year compilation. So, like we mentioned, who's next? Like Will Anderson to me is screaming to be on this list, but he's only been in the league 2 years. So he's not on the list. So it's the last 3 years, and I do think it's a pretty accurate look, and especially of strengths and weaknesses. I mean, of course, he color codes it. The green is the good. The red is the bad. You can see why they landed where they did. Now, you didn't mention TJ Watt near the top, and I'm not just bringing him up because he's a Steeler, but I've said for not for a million years, the last 3 years, I guess, that I think there are 4 truly elite players at this position. The first 3 names you listed, and Watt, who doesn't quite add up by the numbers. And I think Max Crosby, who's also a little further down than I expected, would be that 5th guy. I mean, and maybe even in tier 1. Do you think that's off base? To me, Garrett's still number 1. And trust me, and if you want to get hated and get my house egged, just say Myles Garrett's better than TJ Watt. And I do it regularly, and I do believe it by a fraction, but I think he's the best defensive player on the planet and the best group here, or the best player here.
Yep, and his disruption rate, 26.2, is the only guy over 25% disruption rate. He's good against the run, good against the pass. He's a freak of nature. Mm-hmm. And he's the best. He's the best. And there's a lot of really good ones, and it's not like you're feeling terrible if you've got Micah Parsons or Nick Bosa or TJ Watt, but Myles Garrett is still the best. And I think the numbers bear that out. And it's not just all about sacks. By the way, Trey Hendrickson, if you guys don't remember, led the league in sacks last year, 17.5 sacks. So he gets after the quarterback. He's been really good for a long time. Myles Garrett was second in the NFL with 14, but there are some names with sack collectors that aren't on this list, and a lot of it is because there's everything else that's encompassed. Some guys are better at getting home than others. And the number 3 in the NFL in sacks last year was Nick Bonito, edge rusher for the Denver Broncos.
Strong,
13.5 sacks. Cal Illinois 12.5, kind of play a stand-up role. Some of those guys a little bit more. Donnell Hunter had 12. Micah Parsons had 12. The guy you just mentioned, and Will Anderson 11 sacks last year, who I think is stock is pointing up to be that next guy to join that group, and I'm really excited to see what that looks like. And
there's a couple of things that jump out to me here. There's a lot. I mean, the more I look at this, the more things I find that are interesting. Is the simplest of stats. Our listeners that are not super into advanced metrics. Who has the most sacks in the last 3 years? It's Hendrickson and Garrett tied with 47. Parsons and Bosa are next at 45. So really strong, just basic 80s, stats that all of us have seen. However, one thing that really is screaming at me here is your boy Bosa total hits, which is about 2/3 of the way over to the right. He has 77 total hits. And no one else that I see is even in the 50s. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, he's the only one in bright green total hits there. I mean, to me, that really stands out. A couple other things of note. I don't think Hunter, who now pairs with Anderson as one of the best pairings out there, gets enough credit as a potential Hall of Famer. Like, he's got about 100 sacks, came into the league super young. He's still basically in his prime. He has 43 sacks over the last 3 years. He's, 7th on this list. And if Anderson was allowed, he would be right probably in that neighborhood. That's a pretty awesome pairing. And speaking of pairings, if you don't, even though Watt doesn't stack up to what I think the sniff test is with the numbers here, I did find it kind of interesting that Alex Highsmith's right behind him,
Yeah, Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt both on the list. Brian Burns, Andrew Van Ginkel finish up the top, however many are on here. 12 guys are on this list as they're sorted. Josh Hines Allen up there. Aiden Hutchinson's number 5 on the list. I don't think we've mentioned him. Greg Rousseau might be the most shocking name that's on this list, actually, because he's been a guy that raw as well with the Bills, late first-round pick, a bigger, more powerful defensive end. and he's a really good run stuffer and edge setter, and coming along as a pass rusher as well. And I believe had double-digit sacks last year, right? Where is he at here?
Great year.
Maybe I'm wrong on that. Could have swore
he had a real breakout year, though. I don't know what his exact number for last year.
8 sacks last year for Gregory.
Okay.
But yeah, he's developing nicely for the Buffalo Bills. And so you mentioned Bosa. I think Bosa's the perfect example because he was fully formed coming in the league. He's got a Defensive Player of the Year award, right? Among these last 3 seasons. So he's had stats and gotten home and gotten to the quarterback. He only had 9 sacks last year, but he's just super disruptive. And when you look at disruption equals production, I think Nick Bosa's one of the, because he's just green everywhere, right? On this chart. Yeah. And even if the sacks aren't there, he's getting to the quarterback. And I think the 49ers wanted to add a lot more talent on the defensive line to help him. And I think guys like Watt and Highsmith help each other, right? Like how much is Highsmith helped by having Watt on the other side? And I said this to you off the air, Watt being a little lower on this list, it does feel like Watt is so much better because his disruption rate is 16.5%, which is not nearly as good as 10% less than Myles Garrett. But it seems like TJ Watt on third down is just so good at actually finishing and getting to the quarterback, hitting the quarterback, getting the sack, getting the forced fumble. He's just so good at finishing. And and it might be more by design too, right? Is that because I think sometimes a player...
I kind of want to defend my guy a little bit here because I do think this is a little unjust, and not just because I'm a Steeler fan. I've watched every one of his snaps. Before I do, if Hutchinson would have played the entire year last year, he was the leading candidate for Defensive Player of the Year. Maybe I would have thrown him right in there with that tier 1 group with the Garretts and Parsons. He might be that good already and just happened to get hurt. But one thing about TJ, which is different than the other top guys that are in the tier 1, he always rushes from the quarterback's right side, which I absolutely think hurts him. They don't move him around, and they've talked about maybe they will move him around more. That never happens. His PFF run grade was the best they've ever given out for an edge defender last year. And he's insanely good at forced fumbles and batted down passes. He's as good as I've ever seen forcing fumbles. He has 11 in 3 years forced fumbles, and he tends to recover them a lot.
Ball production.
Yes, exactly. Batted passes like his brother.
Right. Exactly. Interesting there with TJ Watt.
He has 3 interceptions on this list, too. I mean, that's like the most, too. Because he does drop into coverage a little,
I don't think we even mentioned Max Crosby. He's one of the better defensive ends and pass rushers in the league. He's on this list. I think he shows up number 7, according to disruption rate. Impact score is another score that looks at things a little bit different. He's a little bit higher on that. Bosa would be number 1 in impact score, and that's, again, disruption equals production, all the hits and getting close and get the pressures of getting to the quarterback. Nick Bosa, here's the big difference, too. Like someone like TJ Watt and Nick Bosa, or even Myles Garrett. And this is where length comes in for a pass rusher. Nick Bosa isn't the most dynamic athlete. He's a good athlete. He's explosive, but he's not a 4.5 guy. He doesn't have 35-inch vines for arms either. So I think in some ways he's kind of there and can't quite finish in the way that TJ Watt or Myles Garrett might. And that's why Myles Garrett is so amazing because, Micah Parsons has all the insane speed. Well, Myles Garrett has all the speed, but has all the length and all the size and all the weight. He has everything. It's just
he's bigger than all these guys. He was made in the lab compared to these other dudes.
It's insane.
Right. He was the first pick in the draft.
He's a freak of a freak because these guys are all insane athletes.
Absolutely.
Height, weight, speed, and every way you can measure it.
I mean, he's got shoulders and thickness and length, and he could probably be 280 if he wanted to. And one thing I want to defend Crosby on too, though, of these top guys, the most productive edge rushers over the last 3 years, I would say he's the one that's had the least help. Like how often the Raiders playing with the lead, that's something I bring up with the Steelers a lot. Sure, nice when you're the Eagles and you're up by 14 and, you're at home and there's 6 minutes left on the clock. You can get some sacks and some production. Max Crosby hasn't had a whole lot of that, nor has he had a real threat on the other side to, ease his pain a little bit.
Absolutely. Brian Burns. I want to bring up Brian Burns here, not just because he's a really good player, but because that defensive front that the New York Giants are putting together. And of course, it's mini camp and there's no pads, but there was one rep that was kind of floating around on Twitter that I saw this weekend. And you can't take too much. Again, the offensive linemen don't have pads on. The defensive linemen don't have pads on. There's less to hold on to for those offensive linemen. But you see Burns flying off one edge, and he kind of gets through very quickly towards the quarterback. You see Kayvon Thibodeau on the other edge, gets through there very quickly and easily. And then, Abdul Carter, the number 2 pick in the draft, coming off and around and looping underneath and just looking ridiculously athletic. And all three of the guys get close to the quarterback in this practice rep, probably ruining practice in a lot of ways. And again, minicamp, no pads. And they got that's not the only guys they have on the defensive line. That's just the edge guys that they have. Like,
I think Dexter Lawrence is better than all of them.
Yeah, Dexter Lawrence is in the middle too. You're talking about him. I mean, just absurd how good they could be. And could it be enough for the New York Giants? And could we start talking about some of those other names on this list as well? Abdul Carter, Brian Burns climbing up, and all those guys helping each other as well. Because what Dexter Lawrence is able to do as a pass rusher, just so unique, being that interior defensive lineman that can two gap and also get after the quarterback. Nobody's doing it better than him in the NFL. That defensive front, like the Giants could just kind of
could be as good as any.
Luck into a pretty good season, even if they can't figure out the offense and the quarterback, just because of how insanely nasty that defensive front could be.
I think as a whole, people are overlooking some really good things going on with this organization. And I almost feel bad for them in advance because they have by far the hardest schedule in the league. They have some ridiculous stretches. There's 3 quarterbacks that are going to be in the mix, at least if you include Winston and Dart. That's probably not a good recipe. But like Andrew Thomas comes back and Neighbors is a stud and the backfield's good enough. And I think the defense has a chance to be top 10, but they still may only win 3 or 4 games,
Absolutely. Yeah. It's an interesting team there. It would be fun.
I might want to be the next coach.
What if we could put the Bengals offense with the Giants defense together?
They might be the best team in the league.
That'd be fun.
I think the Giants team is like one of the most underrated units out there.
And you don't want to see the situation with these two teams now kind of bringing this all together. You don't want to see the Bengals continue to have a terrible defense, right? I don't want to see Joe Burrow get Dan Marino'd, and I don't want to see the Giants waste all this talent on the defense front. And then if, at some point you trade Thibodeau or whatever, and then Burns is too expensive. And now you have, a good pass rusher, and you still never figured out the offense this entire time. And you still never figured out the quarterback. So, a lot riding on Jackson Dart and that draft pick's shoulders. Jackson, essentially the only path to guys keeping their jobs and the Giants being good is Jackson Dart is the guy.
Yeah. And history is so rough on first round quarterbacks that are picked like 20 or later, like if you're good enough to go in the top half, you should have gone in the top half. Like there are hardly any hits in that neighborhood. Mike Sando put this out in the 2000s. I think the only 3 names that were real hits that were drafted 20 or later is Lamar Jackson, who never should have fallen, Aaron Rodgers, who sat forever behind Favre, and Jordan Love, who sat forever behind Rodgers. Like nobody hits in that neighborhood.
In the late first round, 20.
Yeah, like the 20s. Yeah, the playoff team picks.
Yeah, you think
like
of
25 years of data.
I mean, you think of all the weird. There was a lot of weird quarterbacks in the 2000s too. There was like what's his name? Ponder, Sam Ponder. No,
from the Vikings.
Sam Ponder's his wife's name.
That's right.
Christian Ponder.
Christian Ponder. Yeah.
The name I'm looking for.
That Walker and Bortles and
the Titans had one. There's EJ Manuel was in there. And these guys weren't even in the 20s. There was just a lot of weird quarterbacks. Teams were like, we're trying to find a quarterback, man. Can't do it. It is tough. And for no really good reason, Rodgers fell. The league was just out of their minds with Lamar Jackson. Nobody knew what to do with him. And it was like, you stupid idiots. And even the Bengals or even the Ravens drafted Hayden Hurst, a tight end, before they ended up taking Lamar Jackson. So they almost screwed it up too.
And Love and Rodgers got to sit forever behind Hall of Famers.
Yeah, and they were basically the same exact situation where, okay, this guy's too good. We're going to draft him and let him sit.
Yeah.
It wasn't a team that was like scratching and clawing. It's like, we have to get a quarterback and force themselves into it.
I want to throw just a handful of edge rusher names out that could be on this list or have some ability, just to kind of wrap this thing up. Anderson, to me, is screaming to be up there. He just hasn't been there long enough. Verse has only done 1 year, so I don't want to get too crazy, but I would be shocked if he's not a top 12 type of guy.
Mm-hmm.
Keon White's a guy I'm high on. Chop Robinson. We've talked about those guys as like potential breakouts when we did the draft class stuff. Rashawn Gary had some splashes, and he needs to get back to it. He certainly has the ability. Nolan Smith is more of a part-time player, though, but coming on pretty strong for the Eagles. Travon Walker, former first-round pick. I don't think his ship is totally sailed. And a guy that is now old, he's the same draft class as Rousseau, is Jalen Phillips. Because every time he's on the field and healthy, I love him, but he's just never on the field and healthy.
Yeah, health is a big one there. So
yeah,
that's where Chop comes in for the Miami Dolphins on that defense.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of good names there. There's a lot of talented edge rushers in the NFL. That's for sure. We'll see if
you mentioned Benito too is another good one.
Benito, absolutely. Yeah, he's absolutely hit and developed as that third down, go get him sort of a player. And there's a lot of those guys too that might not be as complete, might not be as good at run defenders, but man, can really get off the edge and pressure the quarterback. We'll see if Trey Hendrickson gets signed and continues to be that for the Bengals. And we'll see if maybe Shemar Stewart he got compared in the draft process a lot to Danielle Hunter, that raw, ridiculously athletic, moldable defensive end that didn't collect a lot of sacks in college. Maybe he could be that for the Bengals, but he's got to be signed. Does he get traded? Does he go back into next year's draft? I don't know. We'll find out. Let us know if there's any edge rushers you missed that you want to talk about, and hit us up for this week's mailbag at BD Peacock, at Williamson NFL. Of course, you can find this podcast and subscribe up on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcasts. Matt and I back tomorrow right here, Peacock and Williamson.